The September holiday season in Israel now over, and schools expected to open Wednesday. But with COVID infections continuing to rise and widespread controversy over coming updates to the Green Pass system, some major hurdles still remain. For one, government-supervised daycares are delaying opening their doors for several hours on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week in protest over staff shortages and poor pay. And should their demands not be resolved, a full indefinite strike is scheduled to start on Sunday, some 50,000 children being affected. Likewise, Israeli teachers' unions threatening to sue over the Green Pass policy changes, which take effect on Sunday. Under the new guidelines, Green Passes will expire unless citizens receive vaccine booster shots 6 months after their second doses. But that means that more than 1 million Israelis will lose their passes overnight on Sunday. And among them, almost half of the nation's educators, whose pay will subsequently be docked. The union sending an urgent letter asking for a 2-month delay so that teachers can become compliant. But so far, no change has been announced. Meanwhile, regarding the rest of the nation, health experts calling for even tougher restrictions as the infection rate keeps climbing. But Prime Minister Bennett rejecting the calls and criticisms, alleging that only a nation's leader could see the big picture, and that in general, the government policy is to focus on getting people vaccinated and avoiding actions with, quote, low effectiveness and high collateral damages, such as the immediate loss of thousands of jobs. Joining me now with more is Director of the School of Public Health at Ben Gurion University, Professor Nadav Davidovich. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Now, first of all, at the United Nations, Bennett recently made it seem as though Israel is making incredible headway against the coronavirus. But many experts are saying that there's not really any such thing as winning in this pandemic, even in Israel, where some 1,200 Israelis have just died in the last 2 months alone. So how bad of shape are we actually in? Can you paint us a picture?
So indeed, there are no, winnings or eliminating or eradicating COVID. The way of depicting it, I think it's if you're learning to live with COVID, of course, not in a passive way, but in preparing a multi-layer approach. So we have in Israel a very strange even situation where on one hand we have very high vaccination rates, but we had also, because of waning immunity and also lifting many of the different restrictions during May, June, July, and a bit of a slow approach. Now we are finally getting into a much better situation. We see the reduction in the R coefficient, also in the percentage of positive tests. But we still have an overwhelmed healthcare system. It's very hard also to do contact tracing and breaking chains of transmission when you have thousands of cases. Overall, I'm very happy that we didn't get into a lockdown, but I think that there were some measures that could be started earlier. It was important to open schools. And there is no one way of winning COVID. Vaccination are crucial, but are not enough. And this is something we need to remember when the numbers are going down, not to forget it and not repeat the same mistakes we did after the previous waves.
All right, now it's fairly accepted that that the future, as you said, is one where we learn to live with the coronavirus. But are we ready for that future just yet? Bennett is saying that he sees the big picture. Health professionals apparently don't. Is Israel doing enough to slow the spread?
So I'm part of the expert committee. We sent, as we're always doing in a transparent way, the summary of our discussions. And we are still thinking that although we understand the broader picture, by the way, public health is not just about COVID cases. It's also about including broader perspectives about opening schools and its importance for cognitive and mental health, the importance of the economy and all of that. And we definitely thinking that right now, because of the current situation with severe cases, especially those who are ventilated or on ECMO, that we need to be cautious and not to declare any winnings soon. And thinking about some more restrictions, mainly about public gathering. Again, it's not about lockdown or things like that. And finally, it seems to me that the difference between Bennett and what we are saying is not so large. I also totally agree with the approach that we need to be very precise in a way of dealing with those who are not vaccinated, not just saying, okay, there is a mass of not vaccinated and targeting specific groups such as the Arab community. We know that people from low socioeconomic status are less vaccinated. So all of this is creating a very complex picture ahead of us that must be also communicated to the public, because there is pandemic fatigue. We need to invest in the public healthcare system, not just for COVID, but also for the future.
All right, Professor Nadav Davidovich, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Moving on, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett now on the way home from New York, where he addressed the UN General Assembly for the first time as Israeli premier. Additionally, Bennett meeting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield, American Jewish community leaders, and foreign ministry officials from Bahrain as well as the United Arab Emirates. Though as for what was discussed, despite promises to stand apart from predecessor Benjamin Netanyahu, Bennett largely focusing on much the same topics, including preventing Iran from nuclear breakout, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, the coronavirus, anti-Israel bias at UN bodies, and expanding relationships with the West and with Arab states. Here with the analysis, former Israeli Ambassador to the U.S., Danny Ayalon. Ambassador, it's a pleasure to have you back with us. Now, several critics of the speech said that they were largely the same. The Likud, however, is saying that unlike Netanyahu, quote, Bennett gave an empty speech in front of an empty hall and wasted empty platitudes instead of taking advantage of the important international stage. How do you feel about Bennett's first UNGA address?
Well, I think he passed. I think he wanted to assert himself as the new leader of Israel on the center stage of the world, and he did that. Now, we have to remember, Aaron, that the importance of the speech is not to the people who are in the audience, in the hall itself, because usually it's nothing. The more important is the broadcast and, of course, and the message. But I can tell you, I had the dubious pleasure of serving also at the UN with Israel's permanent mission to the UN, and I can tell you that it is not really important who sits in the audience at the hall, and almost the speeches themselves are not that important. It's just a routine to go through the motion. But if you look historically, since the UN was established, 1945, right? Do you remember any major speech, anything that was really a watershed? None. Any major speeches in the last 70 years were done outside of the UN. One that I can recall is the Winston Churchill, when he talked about the first time about the Iron Curtain, you know, recognizing the Cold War. This was not at the UN. When Nixon went to China, and then there were major speeches about bringing China and the US together and all that, it wasn't at the UN. So it's just a matter of routine. I wouldn't take it seriously at all, the accusation that nobody was in the hall. It does not matter whatsoever.
Well, so what do you feel maybe were some of the standout moments, if there were any, from the speech? You know, did he make any surprising or previously unconsidered points? I know Bennett said that there would be no graphs or pictures or posters, alluding to Netanyahu's famous Iran bomb picture. But you know, those pictures last in our memory. They make a point.
Well, it seems like Bennett's major goal was the message to the public here in Israel. And this is why he wanted to be the anti-Netanyahu. And this is how they prepped, his office prepped the public here in Israel, that it's going to be straightforward, businesslike, without all this pomp and circumstance, no illustrations, no cardboards. This is fine. It was an okay speech, but nothing to be remembered by. The messages were the same messages as any prime minister of Israel would give, certainly vis-a-vis Iran. The fact that the Palestinians were omitted, also there is a message there that really there is no partner. And the other messages that he had was basically here about the corona was more towards the Israelis and the a Ministry of Health professionals than anyone else. One thing that is important, and this is maybe the major difference between Bennett's speech and Netanyahu, is that he went along very well with his promise to Biden not to take any or any disagreements that we have vis-a-vis Iran to the public arena. And I think this should be very much respected and appreciated in Washington, D.C., because pretty much we may come to a point where a plan B has to be devised, meaning putting another option on the table, a military option. We know that, Aaron, the only time, basically, that Iran voluntarily suspended its illegal nuclear activity was in 2003. And why was that? Because Americans invaded Iraq. They were on the border with Iran. They thought they would be next. They stopped. So it seems to me that this may be the only way out of this situation. Otherwise, this doldrums, this procrastination, but by Iran, it just works to their advantage. So pretty much we will have to make decisions. And I think this was the point of Bennett, where he said that, Israeli tolerance or patience is running out, but without challenging the U.S. or the international community yet.
All right. Ambassador Ayalon, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, speaking of international relations, United States President Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan heading to Cairo Wednesday for continued talks regarding Israel-Hamas ceasefire negotiations and a general spike in political tensions across the region. Regional relations appearing to be looking up, and the United States is praising Egyptian leadership for its recent help in maintaining stability, particularly through cooperations with Israel, like hosting Prime Minister Bennett in the Sinai earlier this month and brokering ongoing ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas terrorists in Gaza. But the Biden administration not entirely pleased with the North African Arab nation, and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan now arriving in Cairo to apply pressure on the El-Sisi government. This after also withholding nearly half of the United States' $300 million in military aid to Egypt, with the State Department explaining that the remaining funds would be released if Egypt addresses specific human rights-related conditions, like its crackdown on political dissent. Egypt, on the other hand, primarily looking to gain the United States' favor in its Nile River Dam dispute opposite Ethiopia. Ethiopia is saying that the dam is necessary for its economic growth, and Egypt is arguing that the dam would destroy its economy while threatening to use any means to stop it. Meanwhile, with respect to Hamas and Israel, nearly 5 months have now passed since the most recent war between them, and the shaky ceasefire barely holding on. Hamas operatives still planning massive terror attacks against Israel, with the IDF preventing them at the last minute during high-profile raids earlier this week, and Israel still limiting the amount of reconstruction aid, like steel and cement, that's allowed to enter Gaza, as it's often abused by Hamas to build weapons or otherwise wage attacks. Some aid allowed, though, including $20 million of Qatari funding that was let through earlier this month, and $50 million more that's set to come in October, earmarked for rebuilding homes. In other news, after years of damning investigations and reports, the European Union finally taking a decisive step towards removing hate from Palestinian textbooks. According to researchers, the PA school curriculum has consistently shown a systematic insertion of violence, martyrdom, and jihad across all grades and subjects. So the EU Parliament approving an amendment that would withhold 20 million euros in aid from UNRWA, or the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, unless, of course, immediate changes are made. So what can we expect? With the details is CEO and chair of the International Legal Forum, Arsen Ostrovsky. Arsen, thanks so much for being with us again. Now, how big of a cut is this 20 million euros for UNRWA? What's the state of their financing today?
It's a big cut. The EU is the single largest donor to UNRWA to the tune of some $160 million a year. We have to look at this, I think, in the bigger context. UNRWA has, for a long time now, been one of the really one of the main impediments to peace, aiding and abetting Palestinian terror operations throughout the region, while not only turning its back to the incitement, to the anti-Semitism, and to the glorification of violence in the Palestinian textbooks, but as we've also seen, even some of their teachers and educators really playing a leading role in really pushing forward some of these anti-Semitic actions and education and curriculum. Our organisation, International Legal Forum, has certainly for a long time now called for an overhaul of UNRWA and the EU, for that matter, who, as we've said, are the major donor and the major funder. So it would seem that finally the EU has really said enough is enough, that no longer are they prepared to simply just turn their back to funding such hate, funding such violence. So this is certainly, I think, a very welcome step, and certainly one that we consider a prerequisite to promoting and fostering peace and reform.
So a big question, though, is how will the EU keep tabs on whether or not the PA and UNRWA are actually following through on the demanded changes? What's to stop the PA or UNRWA teachers from submitting a corrected curriculum to the EU for official notice while continuing to teach hate and incitement in the classroom?
The EU certainly has mechanisms to monitor the curriculum, to monitor the textbooks and the education reforms that are in place and requirements that have been put forward. But one of the interesting things, I think, in this particular amendment is the EU has said that if the Palestinians and UNRWA do not reform, if they do not remove this incitement, remove this hate and intolerance, what the EU will then do is they will take this $20 million which has been allocated for UNRWA, and instead they will give it to Palestinian NGOs. But those NGOs that are promoting tolerance or promoting peace, teaching about respect. So essentially what they said they will do is, if you don't reform, we will take the money that is designated to you, we'll take it away from you, and we'll instead give it directly to Palestinian NGOs on the ground who show a commitment to fostering peace, education, and tolerance.
All right, now you mentioned teachers earlier, and we know that under this new guideline from the EU-funded salaries for school staff in the Palestinian territories, their salaries will also be conditioned on whether or not they make the materials reflective of these values of peace and tolerance. What about getting rid of some of the staff who have expressed hateful or racist or anti-Semitic rhetoric on their own time, such as those exposed by UN Watch very recently?
Look, that's certainly a very large problem. Organisations like UN Watch, and also I should add Impact as well, which has done a tremendous amount of research to expose a lot of this anti-Semitic hate and curriculum in the Palestinian school books. So certainly that has really come to the fore, and UNRWA itself has now said that they will be investigating some of these teachers and representatives. So I think that remains to be seen what will come off these investigations. They've at least conceded that there is an issue, and only I think a few months ago, even the EU Parliament for the first time actually singled out and condemned UNRWA for their anti-Semitic rhetoric and actions.
Yeah, that was last April. All right, well, we're gonna, I think we have a lot more to see here in terms of how this will affect UNRWA in the coming months. Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now for our last story tonight, a major mystery potentially solved. Israeli researchers finally discovering why the Dead Sea Scrolls were found where they were in the caves around Qumran. And it's all thanks to researchers at Ben Gurion University who put the puzzle together using an ancient Hebrew document that was hidden in Cairo some 1,000 years ago. We're here to expand. Lead researcher in the discovery, expert in ancient Semitic languages, archaeologist, biblical researcher, and lecturer at both the Israel Museum of Jerusalem and Ben Gurion University, Dr. Daniel Weinstub. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Now, why were the scrolls stashed in Qumran? What is the theory that you've kind of unearthed here?
Hi, Shalom. Well, we already knew before my investigation that the many scrolls, not all of them, of course, were brought to the site from many different places all over the country, thanks to chemical analysis of the scrolls. But now we know, it's my opinion at least, how it happened. Because any year, at time of Shavuot, that is about May, all and every one of the members of all the communities scattered all over the country, conforming the sect, was obliged to gather in one single place for participate in a special ceremony. The renewal of the covenant, the bridge between God and any and each member of the sect. That is a very special and unique feature of this sect, unknown in any other Jewish group of philosophy. As you know, we the Jews make the covenant with God at time of the circumcision, the Brit Milah.
Right.
Yes, but this group needed to renew this covenant every year.
So do you have, what evidence did you find to support, that QUIMRAN was used for this massive pilgrimage?
The two main points of my investigation are, first, that the impressive infrastructure of QUIMRAN, with its enormous ritual bath, the mikvaot, and water reservoirs, fits exactly the needs for this one time a year gathering of 3 or more thousand of people for a few days. And second, I claim that one of the QUIMRANic documents, one of the most amazing of them, the Damascus document, or in Hebrew, Brit Damesek, contains the rule with the regulation of this annual gathering, and they also fit the archaeological data. So all the evidences leads to the conclusion that the main goal of the site was to hold this impressive annual gathering for all the communities conforming the sect for a few days.
So why were the Dead Sea Scrolls left behind in these caves, though?
What behind? Behind what?
Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why were they left behind in the caves of Qumran?
Yes. And it seems that in this occasion, they bring and take scrolls to and from Qumran. They study, learn, and discuss internal issues of the set, etc. So the scrolls came and were taken from Qumran. That is the explanation.
Dr. Weintraub, if you could join us again in the future to discuss this a little bit further, I would love that. Thank you so much for joining us for today.
Okay, thank you.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be cool and comfortable with lows averaging 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect more of the same, clear to partly cloudy skies and daily highs of roughly 85 Fahrenheit or 29 degrees Celsius. And now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral here in Israel.
תעשה למטה, זה יותר רציני. כן. לאט לאט, איזי. אין לחץ, אין לחץ.
Be careful where you sit, I guess. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.21 shekels to the American dollar and 2.53 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.